It's often said in the community that there's no such thing as a perfect game of Arkham Horror. What this means is that it's inevitable that you'll inadvertently break the rules at least once when you play the game. Now, this isn't strictly true. I am sure you can find a playthrough somewhere with no rules violations, but the point is it's very easy and very common to mess up something, and that's okay. In this video, I want to talk about why making mistakes is so common, what we can do about it, and whether or not you should think about rewinding time to fix your errors. Okay, let's start off by talking about the types of rules violations in the game, because they're definitely not all equal. Importantly, I'm not talking about the kinds of mistakes where you come up with some elaborate plan for your turn and then have to walk it back because you realize you didn't actually have enough actions or resources to do it. That's totally fine, and you shouldn't worry about things like that. Just take your turn over again. Here, I'm talking about playing through something and only realizing after the fact that you shouldn't have been able to do it, whether that's several rounds later or several days later. In my experience, these errors come in a few flavors. First, just not knowing or misunderstanding a rule in the game or how the text on a card is supposed to work. Let's say you thought you could attack exhausted aloof enemies and have been playing as if it were the case. Or maybe you didn't know that you can't fail by more than the difficulty of a test, and you were taking extra horror for rotting remains. These kinds of errors are the most understandable because this game is complex, and the rules reference is enormous. It takes quite a bit of time to learn even the basics of the rules in this game, and there are always new updates to the FAQ or rulings posted on the internet. How can you possibly keep up? For these kinds of rules violations, you only know about them if you read up on the cards well after playing the scenario. The second type of goof is when you forget to read the whole card carefully. It's kind of similar to the first type in that you are playing as if the text is just different, but you definitely should have known better. This happened to me recently where I just completely never realized that Opportunist has the text commit only to a skill test you are performing. It's there, it's always been there, but somehow my eyes had always glossed over it. Sometimes we assume that cards work in a particular way, but they don't. It can certainly happen a lot with new cards or new scenarios, but I find this happens more often with cards from scenarios I am replaying, where it's more like I'm playing off of my memory or expectation of what the card says, rather than what it actually says. The third type of mistake is when we make a more procedural error in how the game plays. It's certainly the most likely mistake of the three. The most common error here is when you forget to move a hunter enemy that has been on the board for a few rounds. But this also could be something like not remembering to pay for a card or not doing your Frozen in Fear test at the end of your turn. In other words, these are mistakes where you really do know the correct rule and what should have happened, but you just didn't catch it in time. As such, these are the most likely mistakes that you or someone will catch while you're playing the game, but just a little bit later on, hopefully when you can still correct it. And let's be clear, everyone makes mistakes, even those who have been playing the game religiously for years. So do not feel ashamed of making all kinds of errors when you play. If you're new to Arkham Horror, making mistakes is just part of learning the game. But that's not exactly desirable, so I want to ask, why do we make these kinds of mistakes? Well, the first answer is probably the most obvious. The rules themselves in this game are complex. Unnecessarily complex, probably, and certainly unclear much of the time. You might be coming from another game where the rules are also complex, so you're used to this kind of thing, but the rules between games are not identical, so just keeping everything straight is a challenge. Another answer is that the game really has a lot of demands on your working memory. You need to add together all of your skill bonuses when making a test, and then apply modifiers and effects after pulling a chaos token. You have to keep track of how many actions you've taken, and this can get out of hand if you're playing a rogue. You also have to remember all the text on numerous locations in play, which modify other cards, as well as enemies or treacheries that might only be around temporarily. And with large numbers of locations or enemies, it's easy just to not even see something on the table. There certainly are less complex campaigns and investigators, but the trend in the game has been an increase in the amount of text everywhere. In the Scarlet Keys, there are several cards with forced effects, which they basically couldn't fit onto the agenda or act cards, so they get their own card. If you're playing two-handed solo, as I often do here on the channel, you need to multiply all of this by 2. If you're playing with friends, they can really give you some help while you're taking your turn. It would be nice to have a computer that could remind us of exactly how many actions we have left, or maybe it could force us to do a Frozen in Fear test at the end of our turn, but alas, without a fully digitized version of Arkham Horror, we we have to make do with our own brains as best we can. Finally, it could be that many of us just play too darn fast, and we really should be dedicating more of our attention and time to the game. Slowing down to read cards more fully isn't such a bad thing. Narrating your turn out loud can help you remember how many actions you have left and what your skill value is. But at the same time, Arkham Horror is a social game, and when you're playing together with friends, maybe you don't really have time to play all day long at such a deliberate pace. And besides, you're there to have a good time with other people, not to get every rule correct, right? Which brings me to my next point: who cares? Isn't the point of playing a game to have fun? And yeah, this is in fact a cooperative game, so making mistakes isn't going to cause any sore feelings. You're only really cheating the game designers, I suppose. But really, everyone who plays the game is going to have a little bit of a different answer to the who cares question, and we should respect that and understand why people might feel differently. For one, yes, we tend to play games because they are fun, but the game designers have set up the scenario and the rules as they are for a reason, we hope. Getting the rules wrong in some way might mess with the vision of how the designers hoped you would experience the game. Look, not every mistake has even close to the same impact on the game, so this usually isn't a big deal, but some players might want to adhere to how the designers balance the cards and the scenarios very strictly. That said, don't be the jerk in your playgroup who is constantly interrupting to point out mistakes, unless that is something your group is okay with. In other words, read the room. Okay, so you've made a mistake, and you realize it either during the game or shortly thereafter. Here's the big question: do you restart, rewind, or move on? For the most part, the answer to this question should be just move on. Again, everyone is going to answer this question a bit differently, and here are some of my suggestions. Maybe replay if you have time and you messed up a significant rule in the scenario that made it too easy or too difficult. Like, for example, you play with the wrong scenario card using the hard token effects instead of the standard ones, or you accidentally skipped an act or agenda, or maybe you forgot to include some cards in your deck, or the encounter deck, or the set-aside cards. Or maybe even you accidentally left the autofail token out of the bag. If you realize you've made a mistake in the middle of the game, you should rewind a turn or two if you can reconstruct the game state pretty easily. Or just pay your extra resources now if you forgot to before. If you missed a force test or two, take them retroactively if that's not going to break anything. If not, oh well, maybe take some kind of fair penalty if you feel that's right. Or don't. Now, don't replay if the mistake was pretty low impact. Honestly, most mistakes are. On the balance, these low impact mistakes will have made the game easier just as much as they will have made it harder. Don't sweat it. In many cases, it's just going to be too hard to reconstruct the game state. It's fine to think it through, but now you'll know just to do better next time. Finally, I recommend not even considering replaying a whole scenario if you didn't understand how a player card works. I put this in a different category than messing up the scenario cards, because the designers crafted a scenario in a particular way, but they couldn't have expected which player cards or investigators you might have brought. Maybe there really is a card that works like the one you thought you had. So now let me talk about my own personal philosophy on mistakes. Well, I don't like making them. I find them slightly embarrassing because I feel like I definitely should know better. But more than that, I'm playing on the channel to showcase the game. Scenarios, different cards, different investigators, so it's important to me to get the rules right. I'm trying to learn about what works and what doesn't, and I'm testing that versus what the game designers have come up with as a challenge. I also don't want to show viewers a bad model if I can help it. I do have time to replay scenarios if I make some awful mistake before sending it off onto the channel, but if the mistake did not substantially affect the outcome, I leave it as is. As best I can, I do try to go back and annotate the videos with big mistakes that I can catch, but it won't be everything. Personally, when playing off the channel, I care about these things too, but I'm not going to lose sleep over a mistake. I'll just want to do better next time. I'm not keeping statistics on how many scenarios or campaigns I win or lose. That part's just not that important to me. Lastly, putting yourself out there with your gameplay is very personal. To some extent, it drives the legitimacy of the strategy discussion I like to have. I don't want to give the impression that I don't know the game or anything by playing incorrectly during scenarios. But we're all human, I think, and making mistakes is just going to happen. I encourage you to point out my rules mistakes, but it's often hard to not sound super short and rude in YouTube comments, so keep in mind how acting like the Arkham Police can sound. Look, it's just way easier to see mistakes when you're not actually playing. To me, I do view you all as another set of eyes. If I miss something in a scenario, it's very possible I never noticed it was there. But once someone points it out, I definitely won't forget it again. And finally, I also want to get better at not making mistakes. Whether that means slowing down or making sure to read things more carefully, I'm definitely going to keep chasing that perfect game. That's it for this video. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on what you do to keep up with the memory overload issues in the game. On Tabletop Simulator, flipping those action tokens is a godsend. Anyways, I'm experimenting with a few different genres of videos. This one is definitely more meta about the state of the game itself. I want to thank you all for your continued support of the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.